I have this 330 GTC at the shop that's been painted and slowly putting it together. This is the one that I'm trying to find a windshield for, 330 GTC windshield, which is turning out to be quite a struggle. But, you know, just slowly putting other stuff together until I can find this windshield. The interior is still kind of coming together. I still have to get carpeting and all that other stuff. But it's a project that's just, you know, as long as we make good forward progress, it'll get there. The wheels have been done, tires just need to be cleaned, but the wheels were painted and reinstalled. And what I wanted to do today was just get it started. It hasn't been started in a while. It was sitting obviously at the paint shop, and I put the fuel system back together and put the fuel tanks back in because we had to pull the tanks out because the bodywork on the side needed to be fixed, and you know, we pulled the fuel tanks out, so I had to put new fuel lines in and new rubber hoses and things. So those are all good inside here. So really it was about putting some gas in the car and just say, okay, let's try to fire this thing up. Once I filled up the tank and started to prime the system, I got a bad fuel leak down below. You know, these things happen, and what ends up happening is this is the fuel pump. So the fuel pump is leaking. A lot of times these gaskets and everything like that gets they dry out, and then they'll leak. So unfortunately what that meant was, because the mechanical fuel pump sits so low on these cars, I had to drain the tank again, and you know, I only put about 7 gallons of gas in the car just to get the pump primed and everything. But you know, draining 7 gallons of gas out of a car, just short of sight, because you know, again, I have to drain it from the lowest point because the mechanical pump is pretty much on the lowest point of the car. So until you get every drop of gas out of the fuel system, it's going to continually leak. And when you pull the mechanical pump, you're going to get the last gallon or two of gas come flying out of that fuel pump. So unfortunately, I had to drain the tank. I smell like gasoline, so you're lucky you could only see this in a video. But I'm going to take this fuel pump apart and show you what's inside, and go over some of the things that makes these fuel pumps kind of hard. Not super hard, they're just a little tricks to rebuilding them, but it's also just an insight into how the mechanical fuel pump works on these cars. By this time, the 330s, they still use the mechanical fuel pump, and then later cars after this, they started getting rid of the mechanical fuel pump and just running an electric pump all the time. But these cars, the way they have 2 fuel pumps. They have an electric pump and they have the mechanical pump. You're supposed to use the electric pump to prime the system, and then the mechanical pump should be able to run the car when you're just driving, unless of course it's like, you know, really hot 90-degree day or something, and you can get vapor lock, and you know, vapor starts forming in the fuel lines, and then you can actually flick the switch and turn on the electric fuel pump to help the mechanical pump. But generally the mechanical pump should work. But you know, we're dealing with issues these days with alcohol in the fuel, and it tends to have I think a lower temperature in which it evaporates. So it tends to, I've noticed personally that it can vapor lock faster than the old days. So you know, on my personal car, you know, I could drive my car with mechanical pump, but if it goes above 80 degrees or 85 degrees Fahrenheit and that's not really hot day, my mechanical pump needs the help of the electric. So I can't imagine that back in the day that an 80-degree day you'd have to run an electric pump, but that's just the way, and I think it's the fuel. But anyway, let me get this apart, and I'll show you what's inside. I'm going to have you sit across from me, and I'm going to take this thing apart. You should be able to do it with pretty much a screwdriver. I've cleaned it already, so I've kind of taken all the grease and dirt and all that other stuff just to make it easier. I can't really, you know, you try to fix these things and it's all dirty. It's kind of hard. So what I also have to do here is looks like there's a fiber washer here that's pretty stuck. And it almost looks like there's some kind of glue or something on here, so we'll have to see what that's about. But that's just a fiber washer that's stuck on the side here. One thing I did notice, the second I got to it, I found the first problem, which is this pin. There's a fulcrum pin that's working its way out, and I kind of put it back in, but this is supposed to be pinned in place, and it's walking its way out of the side now. It won't come out, right? But anyway, I noticed that, yeah, you see how this rod is popping out, and that's not good. But I'll take this apart and I'll show you what that's about, but it should be held in place a little bit better in there. I have to figure out how we're gonna secure this rod so it doesn't pop out. I think it needs to be put in there a little bit better, and pinned in place a little bit better than what it was. So first thing I'm going to do is take the pump body out. So hold on, let me just get that washer out. I can see that somebody's already worked on this thing because these screws are not original. They're cheese head screws, and this one seems to have a rounded head screw. You know, a lot of people say that I'm anal about you know, what's original and what's not original, but it really does help sometimes, because if you know what the original screws look like, you know if somebody's been in here before, and if somebody's replaced the screws, you know, obviously somebody's already been involved. What I'm doing here is there's springs inside here, so as I'm releasing these, I'm trying to take as much tension off of these screws as I can, because what will happen is you can strip the screws as if they come out, and you know, the last couple of threads. So I'm just trying to hold it down as I'm pulling, or as I'm taking these screws out, so it doesn't really stress the threads of the screws as I'm pulling it out. So when you take this off, yep, I can see that yeah, different parts in here. Okay, so you know, let me get these screws out. So there's a cork gasket, which is good. You know, a lot of times I use cork. The new ones that are out there are nitrile, which are sealing a little bit better. But there was a time in which these gaskets in here, were no good, so people were using cork gaskets. So it looks like that's what the rebuilder that last was in this thing used, a cork gasket. It still seems okay, but you know, once you take it apart, you got to replace these gaskets, because they're just not gonna. They can only be compressed so many times. So we're gonna pop that out. If you could see that's cork. All right, and gonna replace that. There's like a little kind of like an air pressure kind of thing in here that kind of goes in there. So we're gonna set that aside. Okay, so yeah, somebody's been in here, because these are the check valves that are these replacement check valves. I can't stand these things. They don't seem to work. You know, the gaskets don't line up. It's like they're modern check valves, but in here they have to be perfectly aligned in here with these gaskets for them to work. And I've just never been able to get them to work right. The original ones, which it looks like there's another one that's kind of apart there. The original ones are in here. There's another set. There's two sets of check valves. There's these, and then there's they're brass ones. Let's see if I pop this off without breaking anything. The brass ones are the better ones, or at least the original ones. I haven't seen these fail. But again, it's a matter of trying to figure out what's broken, what's working, and all that other good stuff. You know, so this is the original ones. This is the check valve that was original on these cars. We'll have to take a look. I think you can get these check valves now, new. So we might have to look into getting new check valves, all of them around. And then someone may have replaced the spring, because the springs are slightly different. You know, one's obviously a different color. Okay, so that's basically how the fuel pump works. What you do is you have two sets of check valves. So when fuel goes in, let's see if I can remember. Let's see, it goes in. These check valves allow the fuel to go up, and then these check valves allow the fuel to go down. So each one, they work in tandem. So as the diaphragm moves up, it pushes fuel up through here, because these check valves are closed. And as the diaphragm moves down, these check valves close and these open, so it keeps moving, like boom, comes in here, goes out that chamber. You know, kind of like, I was looking at it as like kind of like a heart. You know, a heart has similar valves that do the same thing. They just flaps. So when the fuel, when the heart muscle closes, the flaps close against the wall, and then the other side's open. So it's just always the one side is open, one side's closed, and that's how you know, a heart works or any other pump works. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is take the other side of this thing apart. What I'm going to do is, let me get a container. I'm going to put some of these little parts in. It's always good to keep track of them. I mean, I've done a bunch of these things, so I know where everything goes. But let's get a little container, and I'll put everything in so I can keep everything in one place. I've got everything kind of in a container and under control. I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of this pump body apart, show you the diaphragm. Again, I think someone, you know, I know someone's been in here because the original screws are not, have been replaced. Again, if you're wondering, they're supposed to be these cheese head looking screws, flat, you know, slotted screws, but they're cheese heads. These have a, you know, rounded head to them, so definitely somebody's replaced them. You know, is it going to make a difference? No, but you can see that they're kind of, they're rounded heads. So I think what was leaking was probably the quart gasket up top here. But taking it apart, it's time to just replace these gaskets, because you know what ends up happening is they just get hard. You can feel this one's a little, yeah, it's definitely harder. The material, if I were to show you, you can feel like the rubber that's been clamped in place is pretty soft and pliable, but the rubber inside that's been exposed to fuel all this time, it's definitely hard. So I think it's time to replace this gasket, you know, and rebuild the pump. I mean, I think what's happened these days with fuel, there's nothing we can do about it. Whatever's in the formula is definitely affecting rubber. So rubber parts that are immersed in fuel are just not going to last for years and years and years. They're just going to have to be replaced every now and again, just simply because that's whatever's going on in the fuel is affecting rubber. And there's no amount of formulation that rubber can withstand whatever solvents or whatever you know, the chemicals that they're putting in the fuel systems that's going to keep the rubber from getting hard. So or is going to affect the rubber and get it hard. So every once in a while, this is just part of the process of rebuilding. You're just going to constantly have to do that. All right, so take that apart. You know, here's another quart gasket, pretty thin, and this one's not gonna come off easily. It's okay, the rebuild kits have the gaskets anyway. So in order to get rid of, or to get the diaphragm out, you have to pop these little pins out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully clamp this down. I don't know why this thing feels so. It's okay. All right, let's see if I can do this. Pop one of these guys out. Come on. There it goes. And then that releases. And there's your diaphragm. So, yeah, if you look, it's pretty stiff. I mean, you see how the edge is soft, but then the center of the diaphragm is rock hard. In fact, you can hear it cracking as I'm bending it. So that pump probably wasn't even working. So we're going to get a new diaphragm. These pins look good. They don't look worn. You always have to check these fulcrum pins. and these side plates, because this whole process, or this whole unit, rides up and down on these pins, and there's a lot of friction on these things. But sometimes I will replace them and sometimes I won't, because if they're not showing wear, I will often reuse them, because the logic being that they're not showing any wear. When you replace these new ones, and you just don't know the hardness. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but like a lot of these manufacturers, what is the hardness of these things? Are they actually hardening these rods? Where are they manufactured? And you sometimes can't trust them. When I look at something that's been in the car and it's been used and it's not wearing out, and it hasn't worn past any hardness on the surface of it, it's probably going to continue to be that hard and continue to function without wearing. I sometimes feel like the chances of taking an unknown on a rebuild kit and putting them in is sometimes riskier than using something that I see that isn't wearing out, is working and has worked, and I may reuse it. And some people may feel otherwise. You can certainly comment below if you think otherwise. But for small production stuff, I really sometimes have to make a judgment call onto what parts I can reuse and what parts should I replace. It's not an easy decision sometimes. I struggle with it, because we definitely are paying to rebuild the whole thing, but what are we rebuilding it with? Are we going to cause more problems by replacing some of these parts because they're not made the right way? Okay, so that's basically a teardown of this fuel pump. And the other thing I have to check is flatness. That sometimes this will get warped, and now's the time to kind of surface them. Get a flat piece of steel or a surface plate or something, and just try to surface this flat. This looks pretty good. It's not bent, but I'm going to check it anyway with some with a surface plate, and just make sure that the mating surfaces are nice and flat. And I'm going to clean these pieces up, and then I'm going to go order a rebuild kit now that I know what I need. Normally I could just order, sometimes these rebuild kits will just come with this diaphragm and a couple little gaskets that go in the bottom of these, that go into the bottoms of these brass check valves. You'll just get this gasket here, and that's good enough. That's all you really have to replace is this gasket. So you pull this rubber gasket out, and that's it. That's all. That's usually what's leaking. Is that you'll get a check valve that has this gasket. You replace that gasket. There'll be other check valves, which this one unfortunately is missing. But that's the rebuild kit. But to get more involved, and of course you'll get this gasket too. This is the cork one. You could feel now that I've taken it off, and I've taken it out of the fuel. It's turning rock hard. It's funny. It's like you see this stuff, and when it was soaked in fuel, it felt soft. But now I bet you if I just bent this, it would crack in half. So yeah, here we go. I'm gonna try to get my hands on, find out who's got the better fuel pump kits, and see if I can get the full rebuild kit with maybe even some check valves, because I think these aluminum ones, this is the one that I always show people, and I was like, stay away from these things. These things stink. I don't even know how, if this fuel pump actually worked with these, because these come from something and they don't actually fit anywhere. They don't sit correctly in here where they actually seal for me. And I've always wondered how these things work, and just never liked them. And always you reuse the old brass ones, or if I could find the brass ones. And but this one is replaced, so I'm going to try to see if I can find the better ones as opposed to using these guys. I'm not a big fan of these. If you've used these and you've made them work, let me know. Show me what I'm doing wrong. But I kind of prefer the old-fashioned ones that work and have always worked. So we're gonna rebuild this and move forward. Just wanted to show you. I was cleaning up the bodies on this fuel pump, and I've kind of surfaced it, just checked it on a flat surface, and you can see the marks on how, even though to the eye it looked pretty flat, but you took a little bit off. I stopped just short of it. I didn't want to take too much material out, because what ends up happening is it gets thinner and thinner, and obviously the thinner the material is, the quicker it's going to warp. But it's always good just to double check to make sure how flat these surfaces are, that way it'll help seal that diaphragm. This diaphragm wasn't necessarily sealing. I mean, it wasn't really leaking anyway, but I just wanted to make sure that it was as flat as it can be to help that rubber, you know, a couple thousandths, you know, or tenths of thousands is not going to make any difference. I think the rubber will certainly make a difference, but again, it's always good to double check, and that's interesting to see how it looked flat, but it wasn't really flat. So moving on, more assembly or more rebuilding of this fuel pump. I'm actually working at my home shop today just simply because I had the parts here, and I just needed to rebuild this fuel pump. Okay, so I've got that. Got these pieces, all these little pieces I need to start figuring out what is rebuildable. These check valves I am going to reuse, and let's see what else do I have. But these check valves, these silver ones, no good. I'm sending those away. Okay, so I've got a new fuel pump gasket or a diaphragm. I've got seals that are going to go in here. These are going to seal the pump body. I should have them all in here, but you know, this is what seals the top lid. So this kind of, just clean this up a little bit here. What I'm going to do, let's see what I have here. Maybe I could just sand this off or just scrape it. And every little bit helps, so get something a little coarser. Got some coarse. So what happens is this goes in here. There's a little nipple piece that goes in there, and then this gasket goes kind of around it. So let me just first get this fitted in here. All right, and then that goes in there. Once this goes in and we bolt it all together, it'll stay sealed. It's a little bit of, I think this little nipple here is just kind of like a pressure regulator. It doesn't, so in case this thing gets filled up with fluid, there's some kind of air pocket in there, so I'm sure it has to do with just pump pressure. So that goes in here, seals that up top. Okay, next step is we're gonna figure out, well, let's see, let's do this. Let's put the diaphragm in. So that guy is this spring. This goes up in here like that. This goes in here like that. All right, and then I get the rod. We have this little rod here. I've got to get, oh, that's right, I have to find the little C-clip. Here's one of them. Sometimes these little pieces are so small I can't even touch them. You know, there's like, so this is like a little C-clip. Let me go get the other one. Let me go find, somewhere in here there's another one. I know I have a spare clip in here somewhere. Let me just dump these out. This is like a little bag of goodies that I'm going to use to make up so what they have is these clips are so much more substantial, and they snap in here pretty well. Let's just double check to make sure they fit well. This is like one of those things where you do it wrong and it just goes flying across the shop. There, see, so that one goes in, and I can squeeze the other one in here. This one will work fine too, but it's smaller. But I think I'm going to change it to the heavier duty one on this one. Anyway, let me get some more grease in here. What I have to do, so we have to get this pad through here. You see how it's offset? So the offset is the wider side of that pin goes to the bottom of the fuel pump. Try to slide this pin. Oh boy, I tell you, it's really finicky here. All right, so what I do is I slowly tighten this down evenly so it closes this diaphragm up. So what we had a problem with was I noticed that this pin that slides all the way through, that this fuel pump kind of rides on. You see how this thing rides up and down? So this thing moves the fuel pump up and down, but I tell you, the pressure on this thing is crazy. But anyway, the pin is working its way out. So what I want to do is, number one, I'm going to grease this before I put it all back together. Get some grease on there, grease all these parts. But then what I want to do is make sure that I peen these edges over so that the pin doesn't work its way out. Because when I took this out, the pin was actually halfway out. So we don't want that to happen. we're going to grease this up. Do I want to go in this way or is it going this way? Whichever way it likes to go in. And I think for some added grease, put it in all these pieces in here so it just, as everything slides in, got plenty of grease in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this in, and I'm going to get my little punch and just punch just a little bit in here. I mean, that's basically what they did originally, but I think it worked itself out. So I'm going to remember to do that later. Okay, so next step is to do these check valves. So these check valves work fine. I've just checked them with my mouth. You can hear it. And they take the large gasket around here, and they fit right in there. So these are nitrile gaskets that go in here. And that's really all you have to change. It's not like you have to change the check valves every time. The big ones go down in there like that, and they seat right to the bottom there. So put this one in here like this. And drop that guy in there like that. All right. Then we've got some springs in here. This guy goes in here, sits inside the check valve. This one sits in this check valve. Because what's going to happen is, when I put the cap on, it's going to put pressure down on this check valve, if you see, and it'll basically force the check valve flush up against there. I mean, they're going to kind of wobble until I get everything back in place. All right, the next thing I have to do is I have to find some check valves for these, because these are different. And I looked in my bag of leftover check valves, and I actually have a pair here. Here's one. And there's two. What I'm going to do, if you hear that, they work. So this gasket fits right in there. All right, so that's one. Gets this spring, or should. Oh, doesn't, because it's a different spring. Aha! I'm going to have to find a replacement spring for that. Okay, I'm going to pick this old gasket out without poking my poking this thing into my finger. Don't know if I'm going to be successful. It's pretty rock hard. I'm going to have to find something sharper. I'll be right back. Okay, this is going to sound crazy, but I broke out all of my spare parts because I'm looking for a specific spring, and I hope I have it, because I need something that fits on this spring, because this has to go in here. These have to go down in here like that, but they also need a spring on them, and which we're missing. So because they changed it out, previous shop changed out the springs, and they must have thrown out, because these springs is what they put on these check valves, however they fit. I don't even know how they fit on these things, but these springs don't work for what I need. So I've got to find a set that will work on here, which they have to fit over that. It sounds very confusing, but I know what I need. I just need to find it. So I've got all my springs out. This might be it. Yep, that's it. So I need these bigger springs. See, this is the spring I need, because this fits right over that. This one fits right over that. See, so this goes in here, that goes in there, that sits nice and flat. This fits in here, and that's basically how that goes. Now the only thing I don't like is this spring height. If you look at these two springs without putting energy on it, this one's kind of low. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I, since I'm here, okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to find a spring that's a little taller than this one. There you go, here's a good one. That goes in there. That goes in there. That goes in there. And that goes in there. Now you can see these springs are more, I mean, I can see it from just eye alone that it's, take some of this like rust off here. Okay, so then with this all loaded in here, you carefully place this on top. Try to make sure everything's kind of lined up correctly. And we screw one of these screws in. I probably should get a clamp so I don't strip this thing. Let me see if I can get a good clamp, and then maybe I can just get a C-clamp or something. Let's try that. All right, I got the fuel pump all back together. Sorry about the Frankenstein setup, but this is just kind of what I have going on. So let me explain what I have. So I have the mechanical fuel pump mounted to my test rig. You know, it's kind of like sometimes when you build these test rigs, you're just building what you have, scrap metal around. But it works pretty well. I mean, basically what I do is I run a loop. The output of the fuel pump comes into, or the inlet goes into here, and then it goes through the fuel pump, and then it goes out and then back into the can of gasoline. What I have here, I mean, this is a slight little leak here. I think it's not perfectly sealed, but what it is it looks crazy, but it's a hinge, and it basically pushes this little bolt against the fuel pump to actuate it. What these other bolts are is to basically set the draw. So these fuel pumps, I don't know why Ferrari did it, but there's about 3 millimeters of travel on the full stroke of the fuel pump. Not like American cars where there's a cam that drives them and it gives a pretty heavy duty stroke. Ferraris, I don't know, for some reason it's very, and it's a really tight push against that, you know, plate. So basically, if you look, as I'm pushing on this lever, it's creating suction out of the tank, and it should pull. But what ends up happening, you can see it coming up, and you can imagine running the car. I mean, right now I've drained the pump, so I got to get some fuel to kind of prime the pump. I'm just trying to get some fuel in there, because once it's running, it's actually pretty good. But usually there's some kind of head pressure. So let me just get some fuel in there. I'm going to run this a little more. What I can do is adjust the stroke so I get a little bit more movement. See how that, once I get this going, it'll start pulling, and you can see the bubbles. And now now that it's primed, it's pushing all the fuel. Because what happens is these fuel pumps, you know, they obviously work at pumping fluid, and if there's air inside, it's not going to move. So what I'm doing is just getting some fluid in there, and once the fluid's in there, it goes pretty well. And you can see it's not a lot. It's just I'm setting it almost like a, you know, almost the worst case scenario. Let's say that everything's all kind of set with too much play, it'll still pump. So I just double check all that and make sure. So that's basically what I test before I go ahead and mount it in the car. But let me go disconnect this thing because it's leaking all over the place, and get ready to put that back on the car. So there you have it. That's basically how you rebuild a mechanical fuel pump in a Ferrari. Thanks for watching.